It is my great pleasure today to welcome on the stage one of the founders of Agile Manifesto, the founder of Scrum Framework, author of Scrum Guide, and also founder of Scrum at Scale. Please welcome on the stage Jeff Sutherland.
Hi. Thank you. I'm in Europe quite often, but this is the first time I've been in Serbia, so thanks for inviting me. We're going to talk about the beginnings of Scrum today, which start all the way back in my 15 years in the military in the United States, particularly as a fighter pilot, then 11 years as a professor in a medical school, and that's where Scrum was formed. The operational side is from fighter pilot training, and the theoretical side is from research, computing research in medicine. In 2006, I founded a company called Scrum Inc. The purpose was to really foster high-performing Scrum, but also to move Scrum outside of software. Today, we work in many different domains, in hospitals, in oil companies, in manufacturing plants. I had a team last year at Toyota all year, many different hardware companies. Scrum has been a massive research project, and if you read all these books, then you'll have some of the background in Scrum. There are actually over 70 peer-reviewed papers in the IEEE library, mostly on Scrum, that give some of the data, a lot of the data that's driven the implementation of Scrum. So Scrum is driven by data. I'm a research scientist, that's what I came from. And one of the most interesting data points is data around Brooks' Law. Fred Brooks ran the IBM 360 operating system projects back in the 60s and wrote up his lessons learned, and one of the lessons was, if a project is late and you add more people, it gets later. And that's because as you add people to projects, the productivity per person goes down, always. And this data that I have in the chart shows you data on 491 projects where they were done by different sized teams. So you can see for this project, a 2-person team took maybe 13 or 14 months, a 4-person team takes 12 months, a 6-person team takes 11 months, a 10-person team takes 17 months. So if you add 4 people to a 6-person team, it delays the project by 6 months. So what we learned was 10-person teams are not agile, okay? So you really need to have small teams. But not only that, when you scale Agile, you have to be really careful not to introduce any extra overhead, or it will start to slow down as you add teams. And the first published paper where we were able to demonstrate that we could double the size of a project by adding dozens of teams in Russia working with teams in the United States and Canada, and get actually more than linear scalability. We doubled the number of teams, and we more than doubled the production. When we published this paper, the academic reviewers said this is the first time in the history of computer science that anyone has been able to show this. So Scrum is designed to solve a really hard problem, and as I said, I'm going to talk about the military aspect in a little while, but I want to go back to the medical piece. When I was in the University of Colorado School of Medicine, I was a professor of radiology, biometrics, and preventive medicine, and I had multiple millions of dollars every year to do supercomputing research on the human cell, and from the National Cancer Institute, trying to figure out what are the steps that a cell goes through before it becomes a malignant cell. And we could mathematically model what was happening then. Today, we actually can do DNA sequencing of the cell and see exactly what happens. And you can see from this chart, there's 4 steps. that a cell goes through to become a malignant cell. What we learned is you can make the cell back up and go back to a normal cell. You can move a cell through the state space of what is possible for a cell by making small changes. So a cell is a complex adaptive system, and a team is a complex adaptive system. A city is a complex adaptive system. So Scrum is based on complex adaptive systems theory. These systems are goal-seeking systems, and we use self-organization is the way a complex adaptive system evolves to seek a goal. It's interesting, a lot of Agile developers think self-organization means you can do whatever you want, right? A lot of people have problems with that, but self-organization is a complex adaptive system self-organizing to achieve a goal. Okay, so self-organizing to do something else is self-destructive behavior. Now, this turns out to be extremely useful understanding for building anything. Okay, so some years ago, the Google architects took me out to dinner. They wanted to know, what is the secret of Scrum? And they questioned me for 4 hours until they understood it. And it basically boils down to this. Before you touch a system, the team asks, what point in the system should we touch? And what's the smallest change we can make to push the system towards a new capability? And then we make that change, we run the system, and then we ask the question again, where would we make the next change? We make a small change, run the system. So those changes will be made in different parts of the system, just like evolution changes a biological system to evolve it into a higher state, okay? We also do the same thing with teams. You know, as we look at the organization, what change would we make in the organization to move the system towards a new set of features? How many are doing Scrum already in this room? Raise your hand if you're doing Scrum. So almost all of you, okay? One of the challenges with doing Scrum is actually getting all the pieces right, okay? So here's a short video on the pieces of Scrum that need to be in place.
Scrum is a simple framework to boost productivity and deliver products that will delight your customers. It does this by breaking the complex into smaller component parts. Teams then focus on tackling one piece at a time. After each incremental step, the team reevaluates what direction the product should take and what process is most efficient to accomplish that. Scrum allows you and your team to inspect and adapt your product, process, and plans more quickly. An easy way to remember all the key elements of Scrum is this: 3-5-3. The first 3 represents the 3 roles in Scrum: the product owner, Scrum Master, and the team. There are 5 meetings that we call events, and 3 artifacts, which are produced in or help guide these events. Here's how it works. All good products start with a goal and a vision of how to get there. That's what the product owner does in Scrum. They own the what, as in what the team is going to make. The product owner creates a prioritized to-do list of all the things which need to be done in order to finish the product. This is called the product backlog. Then, the team that will do the work takes a look at that product backlog during sprint planning, the first event in Scrum. In that event, the team pulls in only the backlog items they believe they can finish in a set period of time, known as a sprint. This shorter to-do list is called the sprint backlog. Once that's ready, the actual sprint can begin. Sprints are the heartbeat of Scrum. This is when the actual work takes place. Each sprint lasts from 1 to 4 weeks. They're short by design. A sprint should be just long enough to allow the team to produce a meaningful working piece of the product that could be released to customers. We call this a potentially shippable product increment. But sprints should still be short enough that the product owner, Scrum Master, and team can change course if needed based on consumer or stakeholder feedback. Throughout the sprint, the Scrum Master coaches the team and product owner on Scrum. They also facilitate the events and support the team as needed. Every workday, the product owner, Scrum Master, and team gather for the daily Scrum. This event should take no more than 15 minutes, and everyone states what they did yesterday to make progress toward the sprint goal, what they will do today, and they note anything that is slowing them down or getting in their way. The next event in Scrum happens at the end of the sprint. It's called Sprint Review. At this event, the product owner makes sure the right customers or stakeholders are there to see the potentially shippable product increment demonstrated and give their feedback. The final event in Scrum is the Sprint Retrospective. This is where the team looks back on the process and the sprint as a whole and says what went well and what could have gone better. Plus, they agree on trying something in the next sprint that may boost production or make the process work better. And that's it, the basic 3-5-3 structure of Scrum.
Okay, so it's a simple idea, but it turns out that over half the Scrum teams in the world are missing one of those pieces, and that means they're late, they're over budget, with unhappy customers. In the United States, it's the law that any Department of Defense project be agile, at least in the IT space. And there are so many consultancies that are proposing projects claiming to be agile that the Defense Innovation Board has written a document called Detecting Agile BS. And it has a series of about 20 questions to ask a vendor. The number one question is, can you deliver a working increment of product every sprint, including the first sprint? If you can, that's agile. If not, it goes into the Agile BS trash bucket, okay? And there is 20 other questions like this that the Department of Defense finds really important to determine agility. We know that some Scrum teams are fast, easy, and fun. That's what we really want. But other people, Scrum is slow, hard, and painful, okay? I've heard some developers in Serbia don't like Scrum because they've been on those slow, hard, and painful teams, right? Nobody likes that. We found that in order to implement Scrum so that it actually works, there are certain patterns which are now being published by the Scrum Patterns Group. A new book's coming out. There's certain patterns that must be implemented. You need to have small teams. They need to be stable teams. The backlog needs to be ready. Teams need to be collaborating together, more than one person on a story. They need to be able to deal with interrupts, and they need to be continually improving and putting process improvements into their backlog. They need to finish the sprints early. That's the most important thing. Because if they don't finish the stories of a sprint, it can take 24 times longer later to fix that story than if it was fixed right inside the sprint. So getting teams performing, that's the major focus that I have, also my company. I want to go back to show you how I did it the very first time. I was hired from the medical school by a large banking company running 150 banks all over North America. And they said, Jeff, you have the knowledge of technologies that we're using in the bank. We're having a lot of trouble. They made me an offer that my wife couldn't refuse. And I wind up at the bank as effectively the CTO of 150 banks. And as I'm looking at the technology strategy, I'm watching the projects in the bank, and they're all late. And they're using this thing called the Gantt chart to measure their progress. And so as a mathematician and computer scientist, I calculated the probability that a task on this Gantt chart would be late and cause the whole project to be late. And that probability is 0.999. You're almost guaranteed to be late by using this chart. So I went into the CEO's office and I said, Ron, have you noticed all your projects are late? And he said, yes, every morning at least 4 CIOs call me up, they scream at me. And I said, well, you know, they're using this Gantt chart thing that's making them late, and the managers, when things are late, have more meetings and more reports, and it makes it even later. So he said, well, what should I do? I said, why don't you give me the worst business unit in the company? I will install a completely new operating system, and I'll show you how to fix this. But I need everybody. I need sales, marketing, support, installation, not just the software developers. It'll be the entire organization. And it turned out to be the automated teller systems group that supported all the automated tellers across North America in 150 banks. And we needed a better operating model. And a book at that time that was popular was called In Search of Excellence. And if you read that book, you find that the criteria in the book are remarkably similar to the Agile Manifesto. This is back in 1983, okay? Almost 20 years before the Agile Manifesto meeting. So I got everybody in the business unit together and I said, okay, we're going to have small teams. You know, the right size team is 4 or 5 people. I learned that from working with Bell Labs, but Harvard research has confirmed that. After 20 years of study, they said the right size of a team averages 4.6 people. That will give you the best performance and the best resiliency. 4 or 5 people is the right size. And I said, we're going to work in 1-week intervals, which today we call sprints. And at the beginning, the product owner will come in out of product marketing, create a backlog ordered by business value, and on Friday afternoon, everything will be shipped. Whether it's a sales proposal or a piece of software, it will be live at 150 banks. And I said, I'm going to teach you how to do this like I trained fighter pilots. I'm going to give you a burn down chart that shows you how a pilot brings that plane in, lands it right at the end of the runway. This is the F4 that I used to fly for many, many years. And when you're first training pilots, they usually come in high, and then they have to come around and try it again. Over and over, they try it until they can slam that aircraft at the end of the runway. This aircraft is designed to land on an aircraft carrier. So you want to crunch it on the runway. That absorbs a lot of the energy and slows it down. So the team worked at this for 6 weeks. They tried it, and it was on the 6 weeks that they landed that project. And once they did that, the whole dynamic of the organization changed. In the beginning, when we started, revenue was 30% less than the cost. Within 6 months, the revenue was 30% more than the cost, and became the most profitable business unit in the bank. And they said, Jeff, you know, we're going to invest in your unit because you guys are making the most money. Here's another $20 million to invest in Scrum. Okay, this is back in 1983. All this was worked out then in the first prototype. Today, recently, I've written this down in what we call the Scrum at Scale Guide. And it's a way of having many, many teams across an entire organization that scales linearly. People ask me, what's the difference between Scrum and Scale, the other scaling frameworks? The other scaling frameworks have, most of them, too much bureaucracy, too much overhead, and as you get bigger, you slow down. Also, the other frameworks are mostly IT focused. You can't get super high performance for an organization to make the stock price go up unless the entire organization is scrumming. Okay, so in Scrum at Scale, we have two pieces. We have the product owner side and the components that the product owner needs to go through and make work properly. Similarly, on the Scrum Master side, we have the development teams, all the pieces that they need to do. And we don't have time to go into this in all in detail, but I will tell you, we like to go in, do a couple of days of evaluation. We call it a go-see, as they do at Toyota. We figure out what are the problems in the organization. Then we want to meet with the senior management team and go through those problems and show how Scrum can solve the organizational and the delivery problem. And we want the senior management to be willing to prioritize everything and take some top priority initiatives and create an Agile bubble and put a leadership team in charge of that Agile bubble and set it up so that it really works. And to do that, they have to change all the rules. All the operating rules of the organization has to be radically different. So for example, at 3M, they had a 2-year product development life cycle. And their competition is delivering 2 new products every quarter. So the first challenge of the leadership for the Agile bubble was rewrite the entire project development life cycle so you can deliver 2 new products every quarter, okay? And everything needs to change that slows down production. We create what we call a meta scrum, which is a leadership team that prioritizes everything and makes sure everything is always prioritized. And we form the teams around their backlog to maximize production. We want the teams, the sets of teams, to be a delivery team. At the end of the sprint, they deliver, ideally deploy, by the end of the sprint or more often. And once we get a small set of initiatives working well as a reference model, we want to then roll that out in rolling waves across the organization. And this is the strategy for Scrum at Scale. And while doing it, we have to have the minimum viable bureaucracy, okay? So in Scrum at Scale, we have nothing but Scrum teams, but we have a few special Scrum teams. The Scrum of Scrums, which is a team of teams, has a scaled daily Scrum, and at the end of a sprint, they can release a product. So they are a release team. We have a leadership team we call the Executive Action Team that is responsible for making sure the Agile environment works, and we have what we call an executive meta scrum that prioritizes everything in the organization. So we're always working on the top priorities. Let me show you how I did that at Toyota. Last year we had a team all year at Toyota, and the first thing we did was we got the leadership in the room. We prioritized every project and every initiative at Toyota. There were 340 initiatives at Toyota America. We're also working with the Toyota research team at Toyota City in Japan. We have a subsidiary in Japan that trains people there. But in the United States, we found the most important project that they needed to get done was the project that paid commissions to dealers for selling cars. And that was so important, they had 200 people working for 5 years, but they hadn't delivered anything. So we said, okay, let's take that initiative. Now, let's create an Agile bubble to do that using Scrum. And we found we needed 20 of those people and a strong product owner, and we delivered to the dealership within 6 months. So consider the difference in performance. 20 people, 6 months, versus 200 people, 5 years, delivering nothing. Okay? anything delivered compared to nothing is infinitely faster. Okay, so Scrum at scale can make you infinitely faster, even at a company like Toyota. Let me talk about another company we worked with recently, Maersk, the biggest shipping company in the world, that has a problem. It costs them $1,200 to ship a container, and they only get paid $600. So I said to the senior management, well, if you could do twice the work in half the time, that wouldn't be any problem, because then instead of $1,200, it would cost you $300, and you're making $600, you'd be highly profitable. So here's the way to approach that. I asked the senior management team, has anybody read the book Moneyball? It's a book about baseball. The Oakland A's baseball team in Washington State in the United States were losing all their games. So they hired a statistician to figure out how to win. And he said, you know, the people that get the most runs in baseball are people that can just get to first base. They don't even have to hit the ball. They can take a walk. The people that hit home runs, they do some of the runs, but they're very expensive. Don't hire any of them. So the Oakland A's hired people that could just get to first base, and within a year, they're the number 2 team in the league win rate, and their costs are significantly less than average. So I asked the management team at Maersk, has anybody read Moneyball? And one of the senior managers said, I've read it 55 times, he said. Got notes everywhere. And I said, well, here's the Moneyball of Scrum. If you prioritize everything in the organization, we find always the bottom 30% of projects are projects that should not be done. So for example, in an IT services program, we did this and we found the bottom 30% were Windows 7 support, and everybody's gone to Windows 10. So in one day, they stopped Windows 7 support and freed up 300 people. So that's where it starts, with leadership being able to prioritize. Then, the remainder of the features, we know, we have extensive data in software, we're gathering the same data in hardware, that 64% of features built are never or rarely used by the customer. So in Scrum, we got to get the product owner to stop building those useless features. And for the top 25% of features that customers will use, we want those teams to perform really well, okay? It turns out that the process efficiency of a typical Scrum team, the only company we found that really knows this is at General Electric, where they have Six Sigma experts that measure this stuff. We said, what's the process efficiency of your Scrum team? It's 5%. That means a story that would take an ideal day takes 20 days to move to done in Jira. 1 over 20 is 5%. How many are using Jira? Most of you. That data is sitting already in your system, but nobody looks at it. I told an Indian team to look at it and calculate the running average process efficiency per story, and in 3 days, they moved it to 80%. And on the 4th day, they were done with a 2-week sprint. It was really funny. They called me up and they said, Jeff, we don't know what to do. We don't have any more backlog. We're going to have to go to our management and ask them, what should we do? Okay, so that data is sitting there in your system. Nobody's looking at it. And if you did, you could finish the next 2-week sprint in 4 days. Okay, that's how simple it is to get high-performing teams. But you need to know your process efficiency. One company that has really high process efficiency is Amazon. They have 3,300 Scrum teams. They're all 2 pizza teams. You can feed them with 2 pizzas dinner. I mean, it's typically no more than 6 to 8 people. And they deliver more than once a second a new feature. And as a result, any domain that Amazon goes in, they crush all the competition. Now, you might think that you're immune to them, but in Germany, I just came from Germany, and the strategy team for the biggest bank in Germany told me, Amazon's doing loans in Germany. They can calculate the risk of your loan in about 2 seconds, and they can give you a loan in 3 minutes. It takes us 3 weeks. We have to get out of that business. We're incubating as many fintech startups as we can, as fast as we can, to find out something that will work against Amazon. Okay? So no matter where you're working, in banks, insurance, in hardware, there are companies that can come in and radically upend your business if you don't learn how to deliver better. Another interesting example of Scrum at Scale is that Spotify, and recently I've worked closely with Henrik Nieberg for the last more than a decade, and we were teaching Scrum at Scale together while he was rolling out the Spotify model. So he said, Jeff, I want to be a certified Scrum at Scale trainer. I said, but you need a case study. He said, my case study's Spotify.
Hi,
okay?
I'm Henrik. I'd like to talk a bit about the Spotify engineering culture video and how it relates to the Scrum at Scale model. I've worked for over a decade with Jeff Sutherland, and while he was evolving the thing that later on came to be known as Scrum at Scale, I was deep in the trenches at Spotify helping to develop their scaling approach. As we co-trained, we spent a lot of time sharing knowledge, and as a result, some of the scaling patterns we used at Spotify got codified into Jeff's model. For example, the executive Metascrum maps to what we at Spotify called strategy days, a recurring event where a bunch of leaders and stakeholders get together to align around a set of strategic priorities, or bets as we call them. The Agile practice maps to our first Agile Guild, where Agile coaches get together to support, train, and coach each other, and figure out how to take the culture to the next level. We use tools like the health check model to visualize progress and guide the improvements. Executive Action Team in Scrum at Scale maps to the POCLAC model that many tribes used. POCLAC is a cross-section of the tribe, including product owners, chapter leads, and Agile coaches. They would get together on a regular basis to solve tribe-level impediments. But the most important connection to Scrum at Scale is the focus on delivery. Pretty much all our improvement efforts were oriented around enabling teams to move fast, to ship software as frequently as possible with minimum pain and overhead. Speed is really worth emphasizing. I'm currently on the Minecraft development team at Mojang. We have 90 million active users, and I think one of the most important success factors is the fact that we roll out a new snapshot release every week. This gives us really fast feedback, which translates to agility and fast product improvement. For the team, releasing is kind of like a forcing function for collaboration, because with weekly releases, we just don't have time for much bureaucracy or waste. Anyway, thanks for listening, and good luck with your own journey.
Okay, so being able to deliver early and often is really the key to high-performing teams and success. David Rico did a study of what's the return on investment for moving to a totally automated deployment cycle. Today they call that DevOps, right? Except most people doing DevOps aren't doing continuous deployment automated like Amazon. But if you can get there, there's a 72,000% return on investment. So a lot of big banks, they don't understand that. You know, oh, it's going to be expensive to get automated deployment. They don't realize that every dollar that Amazon spends on that, they get $72,000 back. And the bank is spending $72,000 every day to do $1 worth of work. Okay, how silly is that? But getting people to change their mindset so they get into the reality of the modern world, that is a huge challenge. Let me talk about a company that does this pretty well. One of our favorite customers is the Saab Technologies that builds the Gripen, which Aviation Week says is the best fighter aircraft in the world. And Jane's Aviation Weekly says it's the cheapest fighter aircraft in the world. They build it using Scrum and 3-week sprints. They have over 2,000 people every day. This morning at 7:30, all their Scrum teams had their daily meeting. At 7:45, they had a scale daily Scrum. But since they have so many teams, we don't want any more than 3 to 9 teams in a scale daily Scrum, so we need to go up to another level. Have a scale daily Scrum of Scrums, and then even to another level. Here's one of their teams working on cockpit design. You can see how big is that team? It's 5 people, right? The plane is always flying. The pilots are co-located with the team. They can turn around and test in the air in 45 minutes. So 7:30 today, daily Scrum, 7:45 Scrum of Scrums, scale daily Scrum, all the way up to 8:30. The senior management is the executive action team. They meet as a Scrum team every day and remove any problems in the factory as fast as they can in the morning.
Let me ask you one last question, which is the fundamental architecture of the jet at a time when people are talking about open architectures. What I thought was really, really compelling was years ago when I got the first brief in Linköping on the aircraft was that effectively it's an iPad and users get a tool set in order to be able to build apps that are mission specific, system specific, and that the aircraft is built with basically 20 software downloads over its life. Talk to us about the architectural philosophy of this airplane that makes it very, very different. I'm not trying to do marketing for you, so full disclosure, Saab is not sponsoring this segment, but I thought that that approach was a fascinating approach that differentiates.
Yeah, I still think that is one of the key elements. If you think of, you shouldn't think of it as an iPad, but we compartmentalize the flight safety. I've been a test pilot long enough to know that if you're going to make a small change to an aircraft, there's never such a thing like, oh, we didn't touch the flight control system. You still have to test. But here, we're going to compartmentalize flight control system, anything that has to do with flight safety. So if you're not touching that, which normally you don't in a mission upgrade, you can go ahead and introduce mission software into the aircraft with minimal testing. And though that mission software could be in the form of apps, you could even imagine a country, you could, at a Farnborough in a few years, we might have a competition and say, anyone write an app and we'll introduce it to the simulator here and now, or even the aircraft, and we fly it. The idea is, of course, for the user community to create their own, to be able to own the fighter, own the mission themselves, without touching basic things like weapons integration, flight control, high angle of attack, G limitation, and that should be compartmentalized. You don't touch that. But if you want to show your navigational polygon in red instead of green, or if you want to show something, a different way of showing your launch parameter for a missile, then that should be available, and that should be as an app.
So today you want to build systems, whether it's software or hardware, so it's componentized and you can update any component without breaking the rest of the system. So now you can take an aircraft, it's like an iPad, you can download an app and it will run. To do that, you have to do what Saab does, and the primary issue is to shorten the decision cycle. This is what makes Scrum works, okay? We push as many decisions down to the team, they can decide in 10 minutes. If it's a prioritization decision, the product owners can decide within an hour. If it's a leadership decision, they should be able to decide in a daily meeting and get that solved within a few hours. The average time to make a decision to get high performance needs to be under an hour. And this decision time is the primary indicator of project success. So we have a lot of companies. I was at the Scrum Alliance gathering in Austin and then previously in other parts of the country, and I always ask, how many people are doing Agile, but the management is waterfall? Old traditional management, but they think Agile means that down in IT they run faster. How many are in that situation here in Serbia? A lot of you, right? 100% at the Scrum Alliance are in that situation, okay? What Professor Carter at Harvard says is he's never seen a sustainable Agile implementation until the management changes, right? So in any large Agile deployment, whether it's at Microsoft or SAP or Google or wherever, you'll see that the managers have become leadership that's supporting the Agile environment. And the whole development of projects, initiatives, whatever it is, services, is driven by the product owner organization and implemented by the Scrum Master organization. And if you do this well, you know, twice the work and half the time is actually just the beginning. Last year, we went into a $1 billion SAP deployment at Schlumberger, a big oil company, and within a year, they're going 11 times faster. They thought it was going to take another $2 billion to deploy, and within a few months, we had them live with Scrum. With 40% fewer people on the project, okay? We turned a multi-billion-dollar project into a couple $100 million with 40% fewer people with Scrum at scale. But at Intel, they have many sets of teams. Just this one set of 500 teams at Intel, their leadership says they have hard data showing they're going 18 times faster. Now, it took them 10 years to get there. It doesn't happen overnight. But that is the state of the art. So if you're in the chip business, if you can't go that fast, you're going to be in trouble. So in summary, what we do in Scrum at Scale is typically we have leadership from a bunch of companies in the room, and we start building a heat map of the organization. And every column in the heat map is a company. And we look at which ones are doing well, which not so well, which ones are blocked. And then for each company, we develop a strategy that we would start to incrementally change the organization to increase its performance. So today, we're doing Scrum at Scale in most parts of the world. Booting it up in Africa right now. There's tremendous opportunities there. Hopefully one day we'll come to Serbia and do some Scrum at Scale training. And I just want to say in closing that I've done nothing but Scrum since 1983 because, you know, I came as a fighter pilot and medical school professor. When I came into software development, I said, this waterfall thing clearly doesn't work. And within a few weeks, at my very first company, we implemented Scrum at Scale. And we've been doing that ever since. And it's amazing to me that it's worked so well that we now have Scrum in virtually every country in the world. Even Serbia, you're all here today talking about Scrum. That's amazing. So I hope that you learn how to do this really well. If you do, it actually will alter the economy of the country. So for example, recently in Denmark, they said, we should move all our development to Amsterdam. They do faster Scrum there. The price of the developers is the same, but they output twice as much stuff. So we can get twice as much done in Amsterdam for the same amount of money as we could in Copenhagen, right? So any country that could do Scrum well, the business is going to flow to that company. So my hope for you is that it's Serbia that it flows to. Okay, so that's my message for today.
Thank you very much. Sorry if the mic is too loud. We will have Q&A session later on the dev stage with you, so use the Match About app to ask any question that you would like. Scrum related, Agile related. And thank you once more for this wonderful talk.
Thank you.